Where have all the men gone? That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt. And I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. Where have all the good men gone? That was a question put forth by the Institute for Family Studies back in 2022. It's a recurring lament, IFS wrote. We hear from women at the University of Virginia, where are the good guys? The guys interested in commitment and the guys who have drive, ambition, and purpose. This is not to say that such men are entirely absent at UVA, where we teach and attend school. They are just in short supply relative to the women with a clear focus on their future and interested in a serious relationship. Agree? Disagree? What makes a good man nowadays, right? That's a big question out there because there are so many homes that are absent of fathers, absent of good men, absent of male figures who are willing and committed to lead their families in the righteous, godly way to go. Before I get into more of that, I want to quickly mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, the online platform for your faith-based podcasts, at washingtontimes.com, where you may also subscribe to my 3 times a week newsletter. It comes out Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And in the newsletter are the commentaries that I write every day at the Washington Times, Monday through Friday, sometimes Monday through Saturday. And also my twice weekly Bold and Blunt podcasts. Those come out Tuesdays and Thursdays. But you can also get Bold and Blunt at Real Life Network. That is the news, the faith-based news platform of Pastor Jack Hibbs out in California. And guess what? You can get Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are offered. Let me go back and read this from IFS. There's a rising senior that they quoted in this piece, so that would make this woman a senior this year because it was written in 2022. And she said, the majority of the guys I've encountered at UVA don't want to commit to an actual relationship. They haven't grown up. They want to hook up with girls, but that's it. Many of my friends and I are frustrated with the lack of maturity our guy friends exemplify. My parents met in college, which was common among their generation, and are about to celebrate their 30th anniversary. Meanwhile, I have 1 year left at UVA and don't foresee myself dating anyone. Well, it's been a while since I've been in college, but college was kind of like that when I was there as well. And I think, anecdotally speaking with others who have sent their kids to college in the last few years, that college really has grown worse, much more secular, much more about the party atmosphere, much more about, as this woman Cece wrote, hooking up. And so it's not exactly a breeding ground for godly men and godly women to get together for godly marriages, right? But the repercussions for society on men not stepping up and being men and not even really having a solid grasp on what that definition of men or male is, biblically speaking, the societal repercussions are devastating. I looked up what happens to children in single-parent homes, and of course, you're probably all aware of how devastating it is for children who are raised in homes absent of fathers. But let me just give you some current statistics. June 23rd, 2023, the Annie E. Casey Foundation wrote, Child Well-Being in Single-Parent Families, a study on this. So statistics first. Children in single-parent families. In the United States today, this foundation found, nearly 24 million children live in a single-parent family. Of that, most are mother-only household. 14.5 million is what they found. More than 6 million kids live with cohabitating parents, and 3.5 million kids live in father-only households. That's according to 2021 statistics. So break it down by race, break it down by ethnic backgrounds. And the foundation found this: Black and American Indian or Alaska Native kids are most likely to live in a single parent family. By the numbers, 64% of Black children and 49% of American Indian or Alaska Native children fit this demographic. 64% of Black kids in America today are in single parent families. That's disgusting. That's devastating, because when you look at what happens to families with only one parent, and just look at the poverty statistics, it's devastating. As this foundation wrote, family structure and socioeconomic status are linked, according to decades of research. The leftists, the Democrats, the liberals, the LGBTQ community would have it believed that there is no difference for a child being raised in a traditional family unit with a mother and father present and, two women, a family led by two lesbians, or a family led by two gay males, or a family with more than just two, or a family of one, or a family, a community. Just the child just being raised by a whole bunch of people, and nobody has a title of mother and father because we don't want to be discriminatory, right? We don't want to be intolerant of those families that don't have mothers and fathers, so we just do away with those titles altogether. Back to this foundation. Increasingly, marriage reflects a class divide, as individuals with higher incomes and education levels are much more likely to marry. In 2021, nearly 30% of single parents lived in poverty, while just 6% of married couples fit that same statistic. That right there, if you care about your child's economic future, that right there is cause to marry, right? 30% of single parents in poverty compared to 6% of married couples. The foundation also writes, single parents are also more likely to live in poverty when compared to cohabitating couples, and single mothers are much more likely to be poor compared to single fathers. So if you're a female out there, it's beneficial for you to insist on marriage before having children, if only for economic reasons. That doesn't even get into the generational divorce statistics that come from raising children in one-parent homes, single-parent homes, homes absent fathers, right? And it doesn't even get into the statistics of drug addiction or alcohol abuse or jailbirds, jail statistics that plague homes where fathers are absent. That's just talking about the pure economics of it, right? But let's read more from this foundation report. Experts are increasingly viewing child development disruptions through the lens of adverse childhood experiences. These potentially traumatic events can take many forms, such as divorce or parental separation, poverty, mental health challenges, substance abuse at home, exposure to violence, and so forth. These adverse childhood experiences can cause what's called toxic stress, which can lead to lasting, deleterious disruptions. Did I say that right? Deleterious disruptions in a child's physical and mental health, education, and other life outcomes. Wow. We know that, right? We know that, and yet society still goes down this path of buying into the leftist line of argument that what difference does it make if men and women marry to have children? Anybody can have children. anybody can have children and raise children. That traditional family unit is outdated, a thing of the past. I just think if you look at the Black community and the devastations in the Black community with their family units and the social issues that plague the Black community, that the Democrats then come along and exploit, right? The gang membership, the crime, the violence, the jail and prison statistics, the addictions, all tailing back to the broken home structure. If you look at that, that's a pure in-your-face example of why society needs to get back to a time where traditional family units are the norm, the embraced norm, the accepted norm. And broken families are something that should be avoided at all costs. And it starts, I gotta say, it starts with men. It starts with men standing strong. Yes, of course, women can say no. Women don't have to have sex and have babies out of wedlock and so forth. But a lot of women have sex and babies out of wedlock because they were raised in homes absent fathers to teach them how men should treat them. So I gotta say, it's incumbent on men first in a patriarchal society, in a biblically based society, because that's how God ordained it, right? Men, spiritual leaders of the home. It's incumbent on men to step up and do their manly responsibilities first for other things in society to fall in line. This isn't to beat up on men. I'm not a radical feminist, but it is to say that if you read the Bible and you read what the proper roles are that God has ordained for men and women in the Bible, it starts with men being strong. It starts with men being the men that God made them to be. And I have the perfect guest today to talk about this further on Bold and Blunt. I'm just going to read a bit from his bio. Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin, former commander of U.S. Army Special Forces, now leads Kingdom Warriors Christian Ministries, and he is convinced of the idea that, quote, toxic masculinity, unquote, is contributing to the downfall of the American culture. I agree with him wholeheartedly, and it's great to have you, Jerry, on Bold and Blunt. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be with you.
Well, thank you. I'm very excited to talk about the pushback that you've been waging against the notion of toxic masculinity. Can you tell me why, and listeners why, strong men are needed for society's success?
Well, absolutely. You know, men and women were created for equal roles, but in the home, in the family, in the community, in the society. But what we see today is we see what I believe is a Marxist movement, part of the Marxist movement that has targeted the families, and in targeting the families, they have targeted the men, the fathers, the husbands, and that's how they intended to really destroy our family structures here in America. And all you have to do is go back to the book that was written in 1959 called The Naked Communist, where the Communist Party USA told us exactly how they were going to destroy America as we know it. And one of the things that they made very, very clear was they were going to attack men to destroy the family structure through the men and the fathers. So we have got to do something about that.
And you've been writing and you've been waging this war against the idea of toxic masculinity for some time. Your latest book is called Strong and Courageous, A Call to Biblical Manhood. I haven't read it yet, but I've read the summaries of it, and I'm very interested in reading the entire book. You take Joshua, who is one of your favorite biblical individuals, and you use him as an example of proper manhood. Could you explain that for listeners, why Joshua is such a great example of masculinity?
Yeah, Joshua is in many ways an unusual character. And by the way, I discovered something that I had not seen before, and that was Joshua actually, there's nothing to indicate that he was ever married or had children. But he stood up at the end of his life, and he stood up in the desert and spoke to all the Israelites as he told them about the history of their plight as they came out of bondage in Egypt. And he said, "Choose ye this day which God you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." And everybody assumes that he was talking about his children, his wife and all, but no, it was bigger than that. He was the tribal leader. And he is an example of the kind of leadership that we need in the home as well as the community as a whole. But Joshua is an example of everything that we write about in the book in terms of what a man is supposed to be. We lay out 5 things that a man is supposed to be, and a man is supposed to be a protector. He is supposed to be a provider. He is supposed to be an instructor. He is supposed to be a battle buddy. And then he is supposed to be the priest of his family. And Joshua was all of those things, and he's a great example of what a man should be, even though halfway through writing this book, I found out that there's no reason to believe that he was ever married or had children.
Now, in modern America, right, and just push to the side for a minute the radical feminist movement. Just take basic modern America, where men and women perform many of the same roles today. Why, speaking to women, why should women still want and desire a biblical or a biblically sound definition of a man?
Yeah. A man has the roles that I just spoke about there, the provider, the chaplain, and those things that I just laid out are things that every woman should be looking for in a man if she plans to spend the rest of her life with him. For example, the role of being an instructor. Well, there are certain things that if you're going to have a family, there are certain things that a man has to teach a boy. A man has to be there for that boy, to teach him, to mentor him. And the woman should certainly not want to be left with those tasks. And that is why this homelessness, as well as the mothers that don't have a man in the house, and preferably that is a man that she is married to, that's why that it is so important, I think, for us to convince men that just siring a child is not good enough. We are better than that. We need to make sure that we appreciate the fact that men and women should be married when they have children, and men and women should raise those children together. And that's not the case today, with over 70% of the black children born in America today are born to unwed parents, or there's no man in the house. And then and it's high in the rest of the communities, the white community, the Asian community, the Hispanic community, and it's at about 50% with them as well. So that is destroying the structure of our families in this country, and I think that women need to be more selective in terms of who they allow themselves to get attached to or get involved with, because there's so many men today that just simply don't see the imperative for them to be in the home and to raise those children and to give those children a real chance in life to move forward, and not to be drugged down by an abysmal man in the house who is either abusive or who would pays no attention to his responsibilities of helping to bring up those children.
I'm glad you brought up the plight of the black community, because you're right. The fatherless homes in black community is just widespread, and I think it's the largest community in America where fathers are absent, and you can see the devastations to that community. There are too many Democrats out there who seem to me to want to exploit this situation and just use it to call for more money for black communities, but it's really because of the plight of the home life, yes?
Absolutely, it is. And just think about the fact that New York City has now announced that they're going to give millions of dollars to people that were out in the streets rioting during COVID. They're going to give them money now. It's something like maybe up to $10,000 per person that was in some way traumatized by a member of the law enforcement community when they were protesting in the streets. What does that teach a kid? What does that teach a kid? It teaches a child nothing good, by the way, and it teaches them that they can be rewarded for their bad behavior. And where is that going to end up? It's going to end up either in prison or in a morgue, and that is our fault. That is the fault of our leadership. And because those leaders don't really have an understanding of what a man is supposed to be. If they did, they would be making different decisions with regards to how we treat people that break our laws. And what we see now is that we are moving towards a totally lawless society, and there are no men, I won't say no, but there are a lot of men who are simply caving in terms of standing against the evil that we've brought into this nation and that we're letting control our streets and our neighborhoods. We've just failed to stand up to that kind of stuff, and it's a man's job. The man is the protector. The man is a defender, and that's what we got to expect from them.
Now, when you lay out in your book, Strong and Courageous, a call to biblical manhood, it's sort of implied that you have in your mind what the proper biblical call for women is as well. And I just wonder if you can sort of run down for me what probably some people are wondering right now. Just because you're calling for men to be biblically sound in how they lead their homes and their families, you're not also calling for women to stay in the home and just serve as a mother and wife and not have work outside the home and so forth. Is that correct?
I am absolutely not doing that, and my wife is very much a part of my ministry. She is very involved in bookkeeping and the handling the book sales and everything else. We work together. We work as one in the ministry itself. And no, I'm not calling for women to go back 100 years. What I'm trying to say is that men, you've stopped doing what God has called you to do. You've stopped doing what God designed men to do. The women, out of necessity, they are having to take over the man's role as well as the woman's role because of so many absentee fathers, absentee men. And no, I'm not calling for that at all. But I'm saying to the men, you get in there and do what you're supposed to do because you were created to do these things, and you better do them, because if you don't, what you're going to wind up with is you're going to be part of a society that is just continues in a downward spiral until you and all the other men get your act together and start doing what you're supposed to do. You make our families stronger. You make our nation stronger as a whole, and I think that's a man's role.
I agree with you. And look at the chaos that has come because of men's failures to do their biblical duty. Just look at the LGBTQ community and the rise of the transgender madness. That's all an outgrowth of the failures of men to serve in biblical ways, correct?
Yes, that is correct. And you know, all you have to do is look at Virginia in the last election. It was the women that rose up. There were some men there, but for the most part, this was a woman's movement on these school systems and what was being taught in these school systems and what the curriculum was going to be and how far they were going to go with sex education. That was the women. It was the mothers that got all fired up, and they just simply refused to allow them to shut them down, allow them being the liberals, the Democrats, the people that really stand for everything that I stand against for the most part. And it was the women. They stood up against it. Where were the men? Where were the men? They were, at best, cheering them on. But this was not a men's movement. And as a result of that, in Loudoun County, it literally impacted and resonated all over the state of Virginia, and the Republicans made a clean sweep. They took the governor, the lieutenant governor, the attorney general, and the whole House and Senate there in the state of Virginia, because the women stood up. Well, where were the men? Shame on you men. Shame on all of you men that opted out on that. And if you had been there, you would have been exactly where you needed to be, not just standing on the sidelines and watching the women do it by themselves.
I think they were playing video games in their homes.
I'm sure they were somewhere.
I'm in the state of Virginia, and I watched that election unfold, and I watched how, exactly as you pointed out, women, mothers launched this attack on the school system. So you're absolutely right there. And I know our time is at an end, but I just wanted to finish with this last question. Look around at America now, and just the feminine women, the feminine men out there, they're everywhere. At this point in time, where your message is much needed, but it's falling on a lot of deaf ears, where do you see this headed in America?
Well, first of all, men have about 50% less testosterone today than they did before.
Oh, wow.
Now, just think about that. And 50% less testosterone. And there are other things, more body fat. And they have more men that are in counseling. They have men that are addicted to pornography, that are addicted to gambling, that are addicted to all kinds of things. Men don't go out and do athletic things. They don't go out and hunt and fish the way they used to, where they were in the outdoors. That situation is going to get worse unless we take active steps to try and turn that around, because men need to go back to being men, which means they've got to get beyond this couch potato attitude that they seem to have.
I agree with you, and what a great message for today's America, much needed. General Jerry Boykin, former commander of U.S. Army Special Forces, and now you head up the Kingdom Warriors Christian Ministries, author latest book, Strong and Courageous, A Call to Biblical Manhood. I want to thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. Thank you.
Thank you, and it's great to be with you.
Strong and Courageous. Again, that's the book title. Thank you for listening. If you like Bold and Blunt, one more time, you can get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at washingtontimes.com, at Real Life Network, and of course, anywhere podcasts are offered. Tune in next time. And in the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.